An ancient road runs between Oxford and Bristol. Since before the Iron Age, this 68-mile long route has connected the river crossing at Oxford and the mouth of the River Avon at Bristol. For over 3,000 years, the road saw battles, civil unrest and wars. It witnessed the changes in every era of English history, and it guided people from the great to the lowly as they went about their travels. And then in the late 1700s, it started to fall into decline, and by 1850 it had become the Forgotten Road. Formed by geography and forged by history, this is the story of the North Wessex Way.
Hello, I'm David Mitchell. I've spent the last few years uncovering the remarkable history of this ancient route. In this video, I'll tell you about that history, about how it's been used for thousands of years and who's been using it. We'll look at the geography that determined the route and why two dodgy members of Parliament in the 18th century meant that the road fell into disuse and its significance got lost in the mists of time.
In a previous video, I talked about John Ogilby's 1675 map of the Oxford to Bristol route. It was studying this map that first gave me the clues about the North Wessex Way. It shows the route running through the north of Wiltshire along roads which today are quiet, unassuming country lanes. And yet here was John Ogilby saying it was a major strategic route. It got me thinking that there must be more to this story. The route leaves Oxford, heading west through Farringdon, Highworth, Blunsdon and Purton. It then continues on through the Braden Forest and the villages of Garsden and Milbourne before arriving in Malmesbury. It leaves Malmesbury and passes through Foxley and Luckington, Acton Turville and Pucklechurch before finally arriving in Bristol. The route is also marked on the Gough map. Created in 1400, it is the earliest known map of Great Britain, and unusually it's drawn facing towards the east rather than the north. You can see East Anglia and Kent at the top of the map and Cornwall and Wales at the bottom. I suspect it was drawn in an abbey or a monastery because churches tend to face towards the east, and that would have been the orientation that the map maker would have been familiar with at the time. When you look more closely, you can see that it's a fairly primitive map, showing just rivers and major towns. There's the River Thames and the Avon and the Severn. But if you look closely, you'll see that there is a faint red line running between Oxford, Farringdon, Malmesbury and Bristol. You'll be able to see it better if I highlight it. This is one of the few routes marked on the map, and it demonstrates that this road was significant enough to be shown on one of the earliest maps of the country.
So what are the origins of this road? To understand that, I have to take you right back before the Iron Age, 3,000 years ago.
There are hill forts and encampments all along the route that date back to the Iron Age. Badbury Clump is on the high ground overlooking the River Thames between Farringdon and Highworth. Then there's Blunsdon Hill Fort with a similar spectacular view to the north. Next is Ringsbury Camp at Purton, and Malmesbury was a hill fort in the Iron Age times, protected on nearly all sides by the two branches of the River Avon. And finally, you have Hinton Hill Fort, on the hill before you descend down from the Cotswolds onto the Bristol Plain, with the road running right through the middle of the hill fort there. I used to think that the route might have evolved to connect these hilltop settlements. However, now I suspect that the route predates these settlements and that the forts were built because of the proximity to the road. The discovery of Bronze Age burial sites and artefacts along the route also leads to the conclusion that this route has its origins in prehistoric times. The very early inhabitants of this island had two geographical restrictions when it came to long distance travel. Firstly, rivers are barriers and are difficult to cross. And then travelling along high ground was better than low ground. High ground was less likely to be boggy, and with greater visibility you can see where you are going and feel more safe. If you want to get from one side of England to the other, then high ground and easy river crossings would be the preferred route. The North Wessex Way obeys these rules. It crossed the River Thames where it can be easily forded at what is now Oxford. It follows the high ground along the south side of the River Thames. It then crosses the River Avon at Malmesbury, just before the two branches of the Avon converge, making it much simpler to cross. It then continues over the high ground before dropping down into Bristol and the mouth of the River Avon and the entrance to the River Severn. And then at some point in the Iron Age, for whatever reason, the hill forts were constructed all along the route. So it is a route that was formed by geography and will be forged by history from the Iron Age onwards. So what is the history of the North Wessex Way? Let's take a look. The Iron Age ended in AD 43 when the Romans invaded, and it's not hard to imagine the Roman scouts walking along this Iron Age path as they explored out towards the west. Indeed, they found something of interest because within 25 years of the invasion, the Romans had built kilns at Minety to produce roof tiles for Bath. Cotswold archaeologists' recent excavations of the tile kilns at Brandiers near Minety shows the scale of this industry, which lasted for much of the Roman occupation. The kiln would have produced up to 20,000 roof tiles a year, and it would have required a significant logistical operation to transport these tiles to customers around the south of England. The North Wessex Way would have been used to link up with the Fosse Way to the west and Ermine Street to the east. There was a Roman coin hoard found next to the road in Milbourne, which can be seen at the Athelstan Museum in Malmesbury, and there was significant Roman settlement at Purton. All this is evidence that whilst the North Wessex Way isn't a Roman road, it was certainly a road used by the Romans. The Anglo-Saxon period followed the departure of the Romans in AD 410, and the road became the route across the north of the Kingdom of Wessex, along the border with Mercia to the north. The road witnessed all the turmoil of that period, with Viking invasions and kingdoms battling for supremacy. This period saw Malmesbury's rise as an important centre of religion, with the foundation of Malmesbury Abbey and the appointment of St Aldhelm as the first abbot in AD 675. Over the centuries, the abbey attracted pilgrims and scholars, and the road would have seen abbots and monks as they travelled to their holdings in Purton and Oxford, where they established Gloucester College. In the early 900s, King Alfred established a series of fortified towns or burghs across the Kingdom of Wessex. They were to be places of refuge for when the Vikings invaded from the north. There were burghs at Oxford, Cricklade, Malmesbury and Bath, connected by roads known as Herepaths or army paths. The North Wessex Way would have been the Herepath across the top of the Kingdom of Wessex. Remarkably, the outline of the fortifications of the burgh at Cricklade survive until this day, and can be seen as the square outline on the LiDAR scan of the town. If we fast forward to the year 1135, 70 years after the Norman invasion, the country was once more in turmoil, with a 20-year period called the Anarchy. After the death of Henry I, there was a struggle for power between Henry's daughter, the Empress Matilda, and his nephew, King Stephen. In 1144, Matilda's forces besieged Malmesbury, and Stephen had to march his army down the road from Oxford to relieve the town. In 1152, Matilda's son, Henry the Duke of Normandy, decided to stake a claim for the throne of England and left France, marching directly to Malmesbury after landing in Poole. There he besieged the castle, and his troops massacred the townsfolk and monks in the abbey. Stephen again had to march his army from Oxford to try and relieve the town, without success. A year later, Henry is crowned King Henry II of England. Another Henry, Henry VIII, used the road in the early 1540s. He arrived unannounced in Malmesbury, having been hunting in the Bradon Forest, just to the east, along the North Wessex Way. William Stump, the king's host for the night, had to tell his servants that their supper was instead going to feed the king. In 1642, the English Civil War broke out. Charles I and his royalist army based themselves in and around Oxford, having lost London to the Parliamentary army. With the loss of London, Charles had also lost access to the important port of London. And so the North Wessex Way became a land corridor to the next nearest port in Bristol. There were skirmishes all along the road as the two armies fought for control. In the spring and early summer of 1643, Malmesbury changed hands 4 times, with some fierce fighting. If you visit the abbey today, you can still see the marks in the walls left by cannonballs and musket shot. By the end of July 1643, the royalist forces had secured both Malmesbury and the port of Bristol, and so on the 1st of August, King Charles set out from Oxford and travelled down the road to Malmesbury, staying overnight before continuing on to Bristol the following day. In the Athelstan Museum, you can see the original letter sent by Charles to his nephew, Prince Rupert, asking for troops to guard him on his journey. The North Wessex Way was used for thousands of years and has seen some major historical figures and events in that time. So why did it get forgotten?
As I stand here on the North Wessex Way, you can see it's a quiet, single-track country road. But there's a 21-mile section of this route that seems to have fallen into disuse. At either end of the North Wessex Way towards Oxford and Bristol, it's now A roads and B roads. I was curious to know what happened in this middle section, and I found the answer in the Houses of Parliament.
In 1755, in the reign of George II, the Farringdon to Acton Turville Turnpike Trust was created by an Act of Parliament. The turnpikes were a way of building and maintaining better roads for coach travel, being funded by tolls charged to travellers as they used the road. However, this turnpike didn't follow the traditional route of the North Wessex Way. At Blunsdon, it was diverted north up to Cricklade before heading across to Malmesbury, thus bypassing Purton and the Braden Forest. The reason for this diversion becomes apparent when you start to look at the trustees for the turnpike. These were the local aristocracy and landowners who would benefit from the increased traffic and business the road would bring, as well as share in the profits of the trust. William Rawlinson Earl and Thomas Gore were the members of Parliament for Cricklade in 1755 and appear on the list of trustees. At that time, Cricklade was a rotten borough, and the two MPs clearly helped with getting the road diverted via Cricklade and benefited from the trust. Not only that, they also had their families as trustees as well. Dodgy MPs are nothing new. On the map, you can see the turnpike in blue diverting up to Cricklade and then going across to Malmesbury on what is now the B4040. On the far side of Malmesbury, the turnpike runs north of the River Avon through Shurston, instead of the more traditional route south of the river through Foxley. Cricklade's gain was Purton's loss. The traffic that had sustained the village for thousands of years gradually dried up until by 1800 the old route was really only being used by drovers who preferred a more direct route with no tolls to pay. By the 1850s, the advent of the railways was the final nail in the coffin, and the long distance traffic dried up completely. What had been a vibrant and busy route for 3,000 years was suddenly silent, and over time was forgotten. Until now.
I hope you've enjoyed this quick overview of the North Wessex Way. I'll be doing more videos to look in detail at some of the history that's happened along the road, so click on the subscribe button to follow my YouTube channel. You can also visit www.northwessexway.co.uk to read more about the road. And while you're there, please sign up for the regular updates that I send out. So until next time, from the North Wessex Way, it's goodbye.